Hello again, everyone. This is my week 3 discussion board and review of the City of Murrieta's biennial budget. So as a brief discussion overview for this video, I will be sharing with you what exactly a biennial budget is, specifically to the City of Murrieta. I'll also be sharing with you some pros and cons as found through my research, as well as chatting with the finance director at the City of Murrieta, and then just my personal thoughts of uh, the biennial budget and why I think it is a good idea specifically for the City of Murrieta. So simply phrased, a biennial budget is uh, a budget as prepared by a city government, but in the time period covering 2 years versus an annual budget. And so having a biennial budget versus an annual budget, there are several pros and cons associated with the former, and I'll go into those right now. So I think number one, having a biennial budget is both time and cost efficient. So in an article by Tolstrup, he looks at the details of, or basically the debate of a annual versus biennial budget, and finds that having to plan for 2 years, it saves time for the department not having to do constant reviews of the budget throughout a annual process, and then also saving the money for the department in the long run. Also, there is carryover of projects over simple years because of increased long-term planning. So when you have projects within a city that encompass several years, having a budget that's planned for 2 years correlates very well with those projects as well and just makes the overall process for the city easier in that regard. Also, having a 2-year budget is fiscally stable. Waylon Charles found out in his argument that being able to plan for government revenues and expenditures for 2 years allows for a stable basis for government for how it's going to function in 2 years versus 1 year because of, like I said, the increased long-term planning. Also, for the finance department, being able to make modifications over 2 years is much easier than having to create a new budget every year and refine that as that year goes on. Whereas if you do it in a 2-year process, you do all the work up front, and that makes the rest of the 2-year process much, much easier. Also, with the increase in federal grant and aid programs in recent years, more funding by the federal government for specific projects within the city makes the planning process easier for the finance department because they're not having to plan on general fund revenues going towards some of these large projects. Some of the cons associated with the 2-year biennial budget process is that there's lots of more work that's put into it up front. And while this could be true, I think this is more efficient in the long run because if you put in all this work to create this budget, you're still having a result that's lasting longer than an annual budget because creating an annual budget is still a lot of hard work. And why not just go and do the extra work that might take a little bit longer to prepare in order to have a longer lasting budget and longer lasting plan as a result. Also, creating budgets for 2 years can be complex, but if your city is taking the proper steps to plan for revenue and expenditure changes over 2 years by using complex formulas and proper research methods, then a city is going to be adequately prepared, I think, to deal with the ebbs and flows that happen over a course of 2 years in local government. And then also there's a con of mistakes in a budget, leading to more complications down the road. I think this is a valid concern because having to plan for 2 years, if you make a huge mistake within that budget, you're going to have very large implications further down the road that are happen as a result of that. And those are much harder to deal with or to make adjustments to as you go. And there was an article by Kogan Greenstein where he talked about short-term issues that are always happening within local government. And I think having a 2-year budget, if there are the circumstances of short-term issues, you have the ability to take a long-term approach to those and really plan out, okay, this is happening right now. This is how the city can address it with all of these different steps. And so I think being able to have that flexibility that's in a 2-year budget, you can deal with those small-term issues in a long-term manner. And then he also said in his article that having a 2-year budget or creating one is more of a time waster. I would disagree. I think having to do all the upfront work is harder, but it's going to be much more rewarding in the long run. And so I think for the city of Murrieta, a biennial budget is the best approach for 3 reasons. Number one, the city is fiscally conservative, which means having a sound and stable budget in mind when it comes to this city is much more effective because it aligns with the city's goals, which is my second point. In the city council goals as adopted every year, the city says one of them is maintain a high-performing organization that values fiscal sustainability, transparency, accountability, and organizational efficiency. I think this aligns perfectly with the purpose and the results of a biennial budget. And then lastly, having worked with the city and its team, I see that they are efficient and goals-oriented, which means that they're just driven by pursuing the goals of the city manager and the city council to achieve things in a way that helps the city be successful in the long run. So for each of the pros and cons that I touched on briefly before, here are the articles that I found and could be researched further by you guys. So that just about wraps up my discussion, a little long, but I'm looking forward to discussing with you guys about your thoughts on 2-year budgets versus 1-year budgets and seeing what your cities use and maybe comparing and contrasting some of your pros and cons as well. So look forward to chatting.